Hello, my name is Natalie Ginter, and this is the Faribault School District Declining Enrollment Community Input Findings Report. A little bit about me as the project lead. I am a volunteer on the Enrollment Task Force Committee. I've been a Faribault resident since 1999. I have one child pictured here. His name is Keaton, born and raised in Faribault and a Faribault High School student. I have spent the last 22 years of my adulthood serving the Faribault community and very proud to do so. I'm currently serving or have served on over 30 boards and committees for area organizations, many focused on youth and education, including Healthy Community Initiative, Faribault Community School, Faribault Community Education, Faribault Youth Investment, United Way, and many more. I have 25 years of experience in population health improvement, including community health needs assessments, community organizing, strategic planning, and fund development. My master's is in community health, and I am a 2020 graduate of the Blandon Community Leadership Program of the Faribault cohort. My current professional role is I am the community engagement lead for Allina Health, and I serve their South region, and I've been doing that since 2013. My prior role before Allina was the health educator and statewide health improvement partnership coordinator for Rice County Public Health, and I did that for 8 years. So some background about the Enrollment Task Force and this community input report. What initiated it? So those in Faribault are probably familiar or can recall last summer in 2020, there was some talk from the Faribault School Board about the cooperative sports agreement. And there was discussion around potentially dissolving the cooperative sports agreement. And with that, there was significant community input to the school board asking for there to be a study into the root causes of declining enrollment in Faribault. And at that school board meeting in June, on June 8th, 2020, there was quite a bit of discussion about this. And I have a link to the video of that meeting in this report. So if you want to watch that conversation from the school board talking about the cooperative sports agreement and the beginnings of the declining enrollment task force, if you will, watch this video. So advance to 2 hours and 25 minutes in the video, and there's about 14 minutes of discussion around this. So I've taken a few quotes from that discussion to, again, just reground ourselves in why this declining enrollment task force work began and the support for it. So below are some quotes from that discussion. From Superintendent Todd Sesker. I would like to explore the idea of sitting down with BA leadership, families who sent emails. I think it's a good idea we have conversations with these folks before an action item on a board agenda. This may not be about co-opting sports. It's something that goes deeper. It's not up to Faribault Public Schools to resolve this issue. It's up to the community to resolve the issue. The number one thing we can do to start this is be good listeners. It's a time to visit with people and discover what the underlying issues are. The next quote was from John Bellingham. He said, "Let's take some time to do more research and study. Let's get out there and dig down to the bottom line issues and see what's going on here." The next quote's from Carolyn Treadway. She said, "We owe ourselves and our community open dialogue on this issue." The next quote was from Jerry Robichaud, and he said, "I agree further discussion is necessary. We can't interfere with parental choice." And then the last quote from the meeting was from the board chair, Chad Wolf, and he said, "Listening goes a long ways. Pointing fingers doesn't help. Public schools is a huge piece to a thriving community. Today, we are not thriving. Most people don't say thriving and Faribault in the same sentence. I would love for nothing more than to see more talented families and individuals stay and be attracted to Faribault. To do that, we have to come together. If we could harness a fraction of the energy and time spent on this subject of the co-op on how we make our community better, we could move mountains. I challenge everybody to get involved." So that's kind of the background of how the enrollment task force began. It came from that discussion from the school board around the cooperative sports agreement and the community asking for there to be more energy, looking into what the root causes were around why so many families were leaving Faribault schools. So the enrollment task force began, and I've been leading the community input process. So to begin this, we're framing the issue. So what is the issue? Again, Faribault can thrive when enrollment in our schools is stable and growing. To ensure the growth and health of our community, we must address declining enrollment in the Faribault School District. We are here to gain a better understanding of the root causes for declining enrollment in Faribault-based schools and the increase in out enrollment to neighboring school districts. With this knowledge, we can do better. And there's a nice quote here by Maya Angelou. "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." So an outline of the presentation, I'll go over my acknowledgements. So folks who helped with the study, and we'll review the structure, timeline, and limitations, the survey tool and questions that were used in engaging the community. We'll review a similar study that was done by Faribault Public Schools a couple years ago. I've got some information on the participants, so who participated in this study, and then some data on like what's the problem, how many kids are actually leaving Faribault schools, how many are coming in, what does our demographics look like, and so on. So we've got some very high level data around some of the numbers. And then we'll dive into key findings, and they're broken out into two different sections. The first one is around out enrollment. So out enrollment is defined as students who are leaving Faribault School District to go to a neighboring school district. And that could include public charter schools, but mostly what we're looking at is neighboring districts outside of Faribault. So anybody that lives in the Faribault School District and they are open enrolling, if you will, to Northfield or Medford and so on. So we're going to look at out enrollment from the Faribault School District and what some of those individual concerns and experiences were by students and families who made that decision. And then the other key findings is on declining enrollment in Faribault-based schools. And that's more of a systemic or community-wide look at the issue. So what's happening in our community of Faribault that is impacting the overall number of children in our community that are eligible to be enrolled in K through 12. So the overall number of children declining in Faribault and some of those systemic or community-wide issues. And then again, out enrollment and individuals who make the decision to leave Faribault to go to another school district. So kind of two different key findings. And then I'll share some conclusion and recommendations of my own, and then that will be it. So first, I'd like to start with some acknowledgements. A lot of help and people went into this. I personally have put in over 150 hours into this project, and it's It's really been a labor of love for me for the past few months because I do care so much about the community and our youth. And there's a lot of other people that are in that boat as well. And many of them participated in helping with the community input study. So I do want to acknowledge all the members of the Enrollment Task Force and the Faribault School Board for helping get this even started. This has been a huge issue for our community for many years, and work just needed to start somewhere. And so I congratulate the school board and administration, and then all the folks who volunteered to serve on the Enrollment Task Force. So thank you. I also want to really thank the members of the Community Input Committee, including Cynthia Gonzalez. She was awesome. She and I met several times. We developed the problem statement and the framing statement and came up with the survey tool, and she helped with translating it and getting the information out to our diverse community. So I really want to thank Cynthia and just acknowledge her help. And unfortunately, she got COVID, and her whole family got COVID in the midst of this. And so she had to step away for a little bit. And that's where a lot of other folks stepped in to help. Kristen Cook, she has been a member of the Enrollment Task Force from the beginning, and has really helped with some of the grassroots energy around identifying families, getting me in touch with them, giving me contact information, because a lot of this was just grassroots, parents reaching out to parents to get input. I also want to recognize Becky Ford from Faribault Youth Investment and Austin Bauer from Healthy Community Initiative, who helped with evaluation and some data. And then Chris Sauer, who's at BA, and she helped with getting me some enrollment data for them. And our neighboring school district superintendents, Matt Hillman and Mark Bristow, super nice guys, willing to give of their time to talk about this issue and just share, what they're hearing from families that are coming into their district, and with no other hope than just to help us get better. So thank you to them. And then Hope Langston from Northfield School District, she helped by providing some of the data from Northfield, and because so many kids are going to Northfield, so they're tracking some of this information as well. So they're willing partners to share some of that information with us to help Faribault. And then of course, all the individuals who participated in the survey and interviews. So thank you. All right, moving on. So study structure and timeline. The Enrollment Task Force kicked off back in September, back when school started. That's when we started meeting. So you see there when we had our meetings, the first one was September 8th, and we were meeting about every 2 weeks. The task force includes folks from Faribault Public Schools, Bethlehem Academy, STEM school community, the chamber, myself, other parents. So a well-rounded committee of both school and community and private sector representatives. So we were meeting about every couple of weeks, and then we started meeting monthly. And then around the holidays that those meetings stopped, but the work had already begun of the subcommittees. So there's a community input subcommittee, which I chair, and then there's a data subcommittee and a staff input subcommittee, which are both chaired by other members of the task force. So the next slide has the timeline, but let's see here. So the timeline, again, we had kind of an exploration phase, I would call it, for that first month, where we really just kind of talked about why are we meeting. We looked at some of the Faribault Public Schools enrollment data. So they were, sharing how many students are out enrolling, that sort of thing. We created the subcommittees, like I mentioned. And then the next month, which was like mid-October to mid-November, was the design phase, I would call it. And that's where the subcommittees started meeting. We did the literature review, developed the framing statement, the survey tool, provided updates to the task force at every meeting, and so on. And then the implementation phase was 2 months long and about a month and a half. And that's where we actually began contacting parents to complete the online survey, and then did virtual key informant interviews with several people. So about a month and a half of actually gathering data from folks. And then the final month here has been data analysis and then writing the report. So all of January has been spent diving down into all of the survey responses, breaking them out, categorizing them, putting them into different themes. And so it's been a massive amount of work in 1 month, but we got it done. So this was the timeline that was developed by the enrollment task force. And so we have worked really, really hard to stick to this timeline, despite there being holidays and COVID and election. I mean, just all the things that have been happening over the last 4 months. This project has taken priority for the community input subcommittee. So I'm very proud of that. Okay, so limitations. So any study is going to have limitations, and limitations are things that can kind of set you back, if you will, and that you just have to overcome and adapt to. So some of the limitations that I would call out are just access to parent contact information. So obviously, families who have left the district, those are the ones we want to engage. And so how do we find those folks? We weren't given a list of people to reach out to because of data privacy. So we had to find folks through word of mouth, like I was mentioning. And so that really started with just an email with 3 parents' names. And so then every parent that I got a hold of, I'd ask for other referrals, and it grew from there. Another limitation was engagement of our racially diverse and ethnic parents. So Faribault has a very large proportion of students in our community that are diverse, ethnically diverse, racially diverse, and engaging those populations. We obviously want to talk to them as well. That's a big part of our school district and our community. And so engagement of those folks was key. And we did have some limitations because of, like our task force committee member getting COVID, and then having to overcome that by reaching out to partner organizations who work with the racially diverse population. So working through organizations like Health Finders was very key to overcoming that limitation. We had a very aggressive timeline, like I shared. So essentially 4 months to design this, to implement it, to evaluate it. That's a very tight timeline to do a study like this. I've been doing community health needs assessments for over 20 years, and that process is about a good 1.5 years. So to do this in 4 months was very challenging, but I'm very pleased with the outcome. Resources, again, limited engagement in the subcommittee. So all the members of the enrollment task force were asked to volunteer to serve on the various 3 subcommittees. We had 3 people. So, but I mean, that being said, you can do a lot with 3 people if they're really focused. So we were able to make some good progress here, and so I'm proud of that. Societal issues going on, COVID, inability to meet in person, conduct focus groups. Obviously, we would love to have met with parents in focus groups, because those are really rich conversations that can happen, and building trust with other parents who have gone through similar situations is just gives you really rich content for a study like this. And so not being able to do focus groups in person was a limitation, but we did change our model by offering one-on-one virtual interviews in addition to the survey. So small sample size was another limitation. Again, with not being provided names of parents, in this being grassroots, the numbers weren't coming in like we had hoped. We wanted to reach about 25 to 50 parents, and we weren't able to get to that number. But so we kind of pivoted our approach to go more with an inch wide, mile deep approach, and I'll explain that more in a few slides. And then the last limitation is limited past research data. So usually when you do a study like this, you have like your previous study, and so you build on that every time you do an assessment. And there really wasn't a lot of information, even though this has been a big community issue for several years. There's really not been a comprehensive study around declining enrollment. There was some information pulled together a couple years ago, and I'll share that in a few slides. So that's it for limitations. So now I've got a couple slides here on the actual survey tool that was developed. It was available in English and Spanish. We wanted to make it available in Somali. However, we just weren't able to get that done. We made several attempts, and it just wasn't able to get done in the tight timeline that we had. So we had to go with English and Spanish. So as far as the questions, several questions were derived from the Blandin Community Leadership Programs guide called The Art of Powerful Questions, Catalyzing Insight, Innovation, and Action. So this is a fabulous tool provided to the Blandin Community Leadership cohort that I was involved in this last year. And just really, really good questions to get conversation going around community issues and how to move those issues into action. So a fabulous tool. And so several of those, the questions that we used were pulled from that. So all of the questions were also open-ended with no character limits. So I find that was really key to getting rich information and detail from folks. Again, inch wide, mile deep was the approach. And so having open-ended questions with no character limits really was beneficial to that approach. The questions were all presented to the Enrollment Task Force at our November meeting, and had great feedback there. So the other thing I would add was that the survey tool was developed in Google, and so we just had to email the link to folks. Anyone who had the link to the survey could open it, answer it, and we did not ask for any personally identifying information, didn't ask for names, anything like that. So here are the survey questions, and I'll run through them real quickly so you can kind of get a sense of the tone of questions that were asked, and that it was more intended to be more conversational, and to give people the space to share their experience, but then also talk more about not only what happened to them personally, but also what are they seeing for the community. What are they hearing? And so let's just run through these questions. So number one, what's important to you about declining enrollment in Faribault, and why do you care? So that question came right from the Blandin tool, and that's really bringing people to the table. It's setting the stage for, this is what we're going to talk about, and why are you here? So that's that question. Number two, please describe if there were any specific concerns, challenges, or events which led you to leave Faribault School District. Please be specific. Three, what opportunities for improvement can you see in your situation? So we're asking them, okay, so this is what happened. What could have made it better? To hear that right from them. Number four, reflecting back on when you first thought about transferring your student to the moment you made the decision, how much time had passed? The reason why we chose to include a question like this is for us to have a better understanding of the decision-making process that families go through when they're deciding to leave the school district. Is that something that takes a week? Is that something that takes several years? And so just to give us a better understanding of what that looks like, because that might help us better understand how we can plan interventions. You know, if it's several months, obviously you've got time there to hopefully change their minds. So that's why we asked that question. So 5, what is it you seek in your child's school district? Is it a particular set of values, feelings, qualities, programs, activities, etc.? Describe what is most important to your family. Please be specific. Number 6, what is taking shape in Faribault? What are you hearing from a variety of opinions being expressed? What's at the center of this issue? So this really gets to the more systemic or community-wide issues that may be impacting declining enrollment in the community. What would it take to create change on this issue? Number 8, what is currently working well within the Faribault School District that is helping to support families and their students? And number 9, what's not working so well? Number 10, what's missing? What aren't we seeing? What do we need more clarity about? Again, really trying to dig deep and get to the root causes. That was the goal, is to get to the root causes. So unless we ask the right questions, we're not going to get to the root causes. So really this just keeps digging down. And then number 11, what seed might we plant together today that could make the most difference to the future of enrollment in Faribault schools? So to really ask people to think about, how could we work together to make this better? Okay, so I mentioned before that one of the limitations was previous data on open enrollment, because there really wasn't a lot done in the past. And so I've got some information here on an open enrollment survey that was done by Faribault Public Schools back in 2018. So I had reached out to Superintendent Sesker about having access to open enrollment forms and so forth. And Again, because of data privacy, he wasn't able to share that, but they did have this open enrollment survey study that was done in 2018. And so he did share the report with me and the enrollment task force. The survey had 4 open-ended questions that were specific to enrollment. And so this open enrollment study was done in 2018, June of 2018. There was 2 weeks where they did interviews with parents, and there was 127 parents in the Faribault School District who participated in the survey. There was one specific question in the open-ended questions asking for reasons for enrolling outside the Faribault Public School District. So in that enrollment survey, they only had 4 open-ended questions, and there was only one question that was really specific to asking reasons for enrolling outside of the Faribault public schools. So I really felt like there was really only one question that I could compare the responses to from that study to this study. So the responses are rather limited. There was only 14 of the 127 parents, and there was no demographic data on those parents that answered that one question. So this next slide actually has the responses to that question. And so I want to compare that question and the responses to a similar question in this study, just to do a comparison. So the 2018 survey asked, could you briefly describe your primary reason for not sending your youngest child to one of the schools in Faribault Public School District? And so here are the actual all 14 survey responses to that question. You can see that they are rather limited in length. So I'm guessing there was a character limit on what people could write in, because it is just so kind of brief. But you can see things like issues like safety, quality of education, special needs, diversity, maybe some environmental concerns, not being impressed with the classrooms and such. So a variety of responses, but they're not, I would say they're not really detailed. So this current study, the 2020 community input study, we have that similar kind of question. And the question is, please describe if there were any specific concerns, challenges, or events which led you to leave Faribault School District, not specific to the public schools, but just Faribault schools. And please be specific. And this is one survey response. When we moved to Faribault, we were all set to send our 3 girls, 2 13-year-olds and an 11-year-old to Faribault schools. But as soon as we walked into the middle school for the first time, we got a vibe, that's the only way I can describe it, that felt unwelcoming. The entrance and interior looked dark. Several people, all middle-aged women who previously sent kids through Faribault schools, told us not to send our kids there, to look at open enrolling elsewhere. And they said, I sent my own kids to school there 5 or 10 years ago, but I wouldn't today. They're paraphrasing. They'd say the levy also hadn't passed, and we were hearing that programs were being cut. Additionally, we felt the school system was grappling with the incoming Somali student population. We were hearing that there was fighting and some bullying going on, not only among Somali students, but the larger student population. That's why we reset the girls' course and open enrolled them in Northfield schools. So I include this just as a comparison because the previous survey had the one question and these 14 responses, but it's just not a quality of information. And this is one response in this study, again, open-ended, no character limits. And you can see several different issues within one parent's experience. We've got things like the environment, the interior, of the school, bad word of mouth coming from others in the community. The levy hadn't passed, so there's financial concerns, diversity concerns, safety and bullying and whatnot. And so all of those are in one response. So I think it goes to show that not everybody, but some people, it's not just one thing. It's multiple things that go into their decision-making process. And that's why it's important to have these conversations and allow people the space to share that experience. Because just getting a snippet is not going to help with identifying all of the variables that go into a decision like this. Okay, so moving on. So this study, who is represented? So who we ended up talking to, we had 18 parents participate in this study, and all of them had chosen to out-enroll their children from Faribault School District. So 18 who had out-enrolled from Faribault School District. The parameters were that their child had to either be currently enrolled or had graduated within the last 2 years. So we were trying to keep it rather current, but knowing that someone might have transferred their child in, say, going into 7th grade, but now they're a senior, and so they've been gone, 7 years, 6, 7 years already. So, but they're still in the system. And so we felt that was important to have it be current, and they didn't graduate 5, 10 years ago. Outside of parents, we engaged key informants, and we talked to 7 cultural and diverse leaders from the community, and we talked to 4 neighboring district leaders and staff. The reason for engaging key informants and doing these types of interviews outside of parents is because they have a pulse on the community, especially our cultural and diverse leaders. They work with our diverse community. They know their needs. They know the issues that they're experiencing. They help them navigate our complex systems. And we needed to have their voice involved in this. And we just weren't getting it through by reaching out to parents directly. We had to go to community partners and liaisons and community health workers. It was really, really helpful. And then neighboring district leaders and staff, including Northfield and Medford. So that included their superintendents, it included English learner staff. And really, again, we engage them because they have knowledge of the concerns of the families that are coming into their district. And they get to know these people, and they know why they're coming. And so it's really important that we engage in conversation with them. So the total number of participants was 29. Of the 29, 13 completed the online survey, and 16 one-on-one interviews were conducted. And I did every single interview, and they were all done virtually. So here it just notes that there's additional staff input coming from the staff input subcommittee, and that is chaired by Faribault Public Schools. So So parents identified in the beginning of the survey, they identified which school in Faribault their child last attended prior to out enrolling. And so I just have those listed out here. That included Lincoln, Faribault Middle School, Bethlehem Academy, Divine Mercy, Nerstrand, Jefferson, and Faribault High School. So obviously we've got a few schools, we've got many schools in Faribault, but on this list, we don't have Faribault Lutheran School, we don't have Cannon River STEM School, we don't have Shattuck St. Mary's, the academies. So there's schools that aren't represented in this, from the parents that participated in this survey. We had 2 participants who moved to Faribault School District, but never actually enrolled their child in a Faribault-based school. And then the average length of time deciding whether or not to out enroll from Faribault School District was 6 months. So that gets to that question that we were talking about before, in that timeline of parents and families making the decision on whether or not they were going to out enroll. By far, the average was 6 months. So what's the problem? For those that don't really have a grasp on the scope of the numbers, I've got some high level numbers here. So out enrollment from Faribault School District, generally speaking, there's a huge number leaving Faribault School District. The range is 900 to 1,300 total leaving. And that's depending on the source you look at. So there's 2 different sources that were used for this: Infinite Campus and the Minnesota Department of Education enrollment. So 900 to 1,300 total leaving the school district. In comparison, there's a very tiny number coming into the district. So the range is 40 to 120. So the net there, is still hundreds of students that are out enrolling from Faribault. Now, as far as declining enrollment in Faribault-based schools, the number of eligible students is also declining in Faribault. So not only do we have fewer number in our community that are eligible for K through 12, we have a growing number who are leaving the community. So it's kind of a double whammy, if you will. So the total number is on the decline. Our population growth rate in Faribault is quite low. Just looking at the census from 2010 to 2019, our growth rate was 2.4%. Compared to the state average, which was 6.3%. So we're significantly lower in our population growth rate in Faribault overall. The percentage of persons under 18 is also on the decline. So in 2019, we were down 3% from our 2010. So percent of persons under 18 went from 26.5% in 2010 to 23.5% in 2019. And again, that's from the US Census. I have a note here, additional detail on enrollment numbers coming from the data subcommittee. So there's a data subcommittee which is chaired by Faribault Public Schools. I thought this might be helpful, Faribault Public Schools student demographics. So you can see on the left here is our public schools demographics in 2009, and then comparing to 2019, so last year. So our overall enrollment went down from just over 4,100 to 3,652. So that's a decline of 500 or so. But what's interesting is down below we've got English learners. The percentage of English learners has almost doubled over that same time period, 10 years. Our special ed numbers stayed relatively the same. Non-white jumped from, say, 25%, it looks like, to over 50%. So again, a doubling in the non-white student. Free and reduced, so those eligible for free and reduced, so essentially our low income families, also increased significantly, going from about 40% to over 60%. And then our percentage of white students declined from, looks like about 70% down to maybe 45% or so. So as enrollment has declined, the student body has become more racially diverse and socioeconomically disadvantaged. So it kind of magnifies the issues because we have fewer students, but they are more diverse and have greater needs economically. Okay, so here's where we'll start diving into some of the findings. And again, they're broken out into individual, student, and family level reasons for out enrollment, and then systemic and population level reasons for declining enrollment in the community. So here's some pictures of myself and Becky Ford from Faribault Youth Investment going through all of the survey responses and categorizing them into different themes and topics, and it was a huge process, and that was what my living room looked like for well over a month. I thought it would be interesting to share a couple survey responses here, just to hear again direct quotes from people who participated, and then how they kind of conflict with one another, because not everybody sees things the same. And so here's two quotes that kind of prove that. So the first one is a survey response, and it says, "I think diversity is the first topic that a lot of people mention, but I think the truth is that the community does not value education. If they did, it wouldn't matter what race the children were." The second one was in an interview, and the respondent said, "Some families think the school district thinks they don't value education, but the fact is they are risking their lives for their kids' education by driving them outside of town. So that is false. They just might not have the tools to be successful." So again, worthy quotes from two different participants, and really they're in direct opposition of one another, because one's saying the community doesn't value education, and the other one's saying they think we don't value education, but we do so much. We're risking our lives to make sure that our kids have a good education. We just might not have the tools to be successful, and that's what they need. Okay, so I'm going to roll through these rather quickly and not dive too deep into them. That's for future conversations to happen as the community decides how they want to address some of these. But again, they're broken down, and we'll start with the individual, student, and family level reasons for out enrollment from Faribault School District. There's 5 main categories identified, and then kind of one miscellaneous catch-all. And these are responses to the survey questions 1, 2, and 9. Okay, so the 5 main categories are academics and learning, family relations, communications and image, school climate and safety, diversity and racial bias, sports teams and youth athletics programs, and then the miscellaneous. So all responses have been analyzed and divided based on their theme. And then these have been further grouped into categories and are ranked or weighted based on simple frequency of responses. So a deeper dive into each of these 6 categories, again, based on simple frequency from highest to lowest. So academics and learning, and I'll just run through these. First one being lack of academic rigor and sense that the average students are falling behind, followed up by low expectations mentioned by almost all participants. The second issue was needing more homework help and additional academic supports. The third was special education and students feeling segregated and having staffing concerns or staff not being trained appropriately in special education. Fourth one, electives not resonating with students, kids being bored, lack of interest or challenge, and no connection to the big picture. Fifth, connection to college and career planning, and concerns about not being exposed to global jobs and careers and developing those interests and skills. And then the sixth being some other issues that were raised, like the class sequencing being too rigid and students' homework not being graded in a timely manner. The second category is family relations, communications, and image. And we've got 3 different buckets here. The first one being family relations and communications, and underneath that is lack of direct communications with parents, not listening to concerns or lack of timely follow through on those concerns. Families feeling disconnected, particularly our English learner families feeling disconnected. Poor customer service and customer experience. Survey fatigue was called out. Parents just tired of all the surveys that they get. And so then the second bucket was reputation issues. There being a perception of poor educational quality in Faribault. A lack of accountability and belief that the focus and resources in schools are for our English learner students. So a sense that a teacher's time and programs are all for the EL students, and students who aren't EL are kind of getting left behind. The third bucket is the perception that the community does not value education or support education, and a lack of overall sense of school and community pride was raised. The third category is school climate and safety. So within that, we've got school culture and environment, students not feeling welcome or connected to the school environment. Interpersonal conflict, and that can be student to student or teacher to student. Safety concerns, and particularly interracial tensions between white students and Somali or Latinx students, between Somali and Latinx, and any combination thereof. And then the last one is a sense of there being low teacher morale, and students sensing that teachers don't care about their work or the students themselves. The fourth category is diversity concerns and racial bias. And within that, we've got policies impeding student progress, not receiving full credit for EL classes, and delayed graduation timeline. And so just some clarifying comments around that is we do have particularly Somali students who are out enrolling from Faribault, specifically to the Northfield ALC. And some of the reasons why is them getting more credit for their English learner classes at the Northfield ALC. So their timeline to graduation is shorter than in Faribault. So that's what the community said was the issue, and so that's reflected in those responses there. Also, inconsistent expectations and discipline. Students of color feel like they're being seen as deficient, and they feel like their discipline is more harsh than what the white students are receiving. And then lastly, just cultures clashing. Concerns over students being exposed to other cultures, including faith practices. Then we've got sports teams and youth athletics programs. So things that came out within that were politics in youth sports, and specifically gatekeepers for certain sports is how I would phrase it and that's how I phrased it for people. So individuals within certain sports that kind of held the keys to who could play and who had information and such. So I'm calling it gatekeepers for certain sports. And then exclusion of young athletes, parents sharing that their children weren't included with team activities and such if they weren't at a certain level of play. And then level for all abilities, not just the super competitive. And that came out really in some of the surveys with folks with younger kids who wanted to be involved in sports, but the teams that were being formed were kind of being pushed to be more competitive than their kids were ready for, and wanting them to either play up to older teams or have more of a time commitment in the sport than they were ready for. And then struggling sports programs, so comments around there just being fewer athletes in sports and the teams getting smaller and that they can't compete with other teams in the conference, and better athletes leaving to be more competitive. And then a no team mentality, strong feeder programs. So athletes kind of developing on their own and not developing as a team as they grow up through youth sports and then into middle school and high school. And then some specific sports that were called out were youth hockey, baseball, and softball. But I've had other parents that have read this say, well, you're missing football and you're missing basketball and volleyball and such. So it seems like there's issues in all sports, but those were the ones that were specifically called out in the surveys. The last category is just, again, a miscellaneous catch-all for things that didn't factor into the other categories, and those being financial concerns, parents being concerned about programs being cut, the system being underfunded, low tax base, levies not being passed, teacher supports. Parents mentioned that they sensed that teachers were just overwhelmed. They needed additional training and diversity and trauma. Distractions in the classroom. Parents have concerns about kids having access to cell phones and wearing ear pods, and that the policy is rather lax. And then students dropping out to enter the workforce. So that was feedback that we got from our Latinx community surveys and or key informant interviews, and within that is that there's just some workforce demands. Our workforce, in Faribault area, they just need more workers. They need more skilled workers, labor workers, and so there are high school students who are dropping out of high school just to enter the workforce, and they can make good money, and they need to support their families. So dropout, while dropout wasn't a primary focus for this study, it does play into enrollment of the school district. Okay, so the second section is on systemic and population level reasons for declining enrollment. affecting all Faribault schools. And again, those are kind of those broader community and population level things going on. And we identified 5 main issues within the responses, and they are captured in survey questions 6 and 10. So again, all responses have been analyzed and divided based on a theme. These have been further grouped into larger categories and ranked and weighted as followed based on simple frequency of responses. So the top 5 systemic or population level issues affecting enrollment are community pride, image and investment, the local educational system, growing racial, social and economic diversity, housing and geography, youth sports and athletic programs. So we're going to do a deeper dive into each of these 5 categories, just like we did the last one. Community pride, image, and investment. Within that, we've got the image of Faribault. There's a general belief, it seems, within our survey respondents that the community just doesn't value education. Faribault has an image of being a blue-collar town, something I've heard many times over my years living here. A history of not supporting levies and referendums and programs being cut. So that playing into this image of Faribault, the community as a whole not valuing education by not supporting these things. An overall lack of community pride, something that was mentioned several times, obviously in the survey responses, was just loyalty to the community, people bad-mouthing the community to other people within the community, to people outside of the community, and then school spirit within the community at large. Just feeling like the community doesn't support the schools, and that there's not a lot of support for things like parades and whatnot. And parades were mentioned. And the last one is investment concerns. And within that, we've got some comments around higher wage earners not living in town. So like executives that work in town, but they don't live here. So they're not invested in Faribault. The struggling downtown, closed storefronts and buildings in disrepair. So we had comments about, just the state of Main Street, and feeling like that's an indicator of the community at large. People spending money elsewhere, comments about, well, we're used to leaving Faribault anyway to spend our money. So what's the big deal? We're gonna leave for school. So again, we kind of group that into investment concerns. The local educational system is category number 2. So perception of a fractured system. So within that, we've got reputation issues with the Faribault Public Schools. There's a critical mass. We've got 900 to 1,300 students leaving the district. There's a floodgate mentality happening. And the responses about, well, I know so many people going to other districts that it was just easy. It was easier. We can carpool and that sort of thing. And then barriers within our diverse community that was brought up with the EL, the English learner credits, and there were comments around mistrusting the cultural liaisons that are working within the schools, and that there's some issues there which are creating barriers within our diverse community between them and the school system. Stressed relationships and an overall lack of unity. So before it was student, 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 teacher, and now it's more of the school to school stressed relationships. So between Faribault Public Schools, Bethlehem Academy, for example. And I think that came from more of the cooperative sports agreement conversation where this began. And then also stress relationships between school and community, and some of the image things that were expressed earlier. Staffing concerns, teacher longevity, Faribault Public Schools leadership not living in the community, so administrators not living in the community, and the community just feeling like if they really cared, they would live here. I mean, those are comments that were made. Why aren't their kids here? If their kids aren't here, why should I send my kids here? So those sorts of things do impact how the educational system is viewed by parents. And then just struggling morale. And then Faribault has an overabundance of school choice. So families are used to having choice in Faribault, and that's good. But they're also making choices outside of Faribault. So families are electing more charter schools, home schools, and online school options as well, not just out enrolling to other public school districts. This next section is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So having kind of growing racial and socioeconomic diversity in Faribault, which we saw in the Faribault Public Schools student demographic data, but that's also true on a population scale. So Faribault as a community has greater racial diversity, a significant influx of immigrant and refugee populations. And comments around, well, there's diverse people just have more, they have different needs. And my student has needs, and their needs aren't being met. And the perception that it's the diverse students that are getting their needs met, or that programs are being created for them. And just some of the issues that creates, not only within schools, but within the community itself. And communication barriers. So just people having a sense that I can't communicate with, half the community. And that's, that's a growing concern, is just not only different needs and cultures and what their practices are and religion and such, but just not being able to communicate and get to build relationships with people because they can't speak the same language. Public schools reflect the community again. It's a mirror of what's happening in the community and vice versa. Equity, so there's growing socioeconomic divide in the community. There were comments around there's more low wage earners coming in, it appears, whether that's real or just perceived, just having job growth concerns and a feeling of there being more segregation, not only in the schools, but also in the community. Some comments around that were more and more segregated neighborhoods that seem to be less connected to the broader community. And those neighborhoods are more and more diverse, certain neighborhoods being more where the Latinx community lives, certain communities and parts of the community where the Somali community lives, and there just being more segregation across the community and within schools. And then inclusion, obviously we've had a political and social climate going on with COVID and the elections and such. And so that impacts our community as well, particularly undocumented community members and feeling unwelcome, cultures clashing again. So those are comments that came out in some of the interviews. The fourth category here is housing and geography. The first thing here is housing affordability and growth. So this is kind of an area where, for me, I actually learned quite a bit, because there were things that came out in the interviews and survey that that I had not heard before, which might be really interesting for others in the community. But around housing affordability and growth, so there's lower property taxes in Faribault, and the cost to buy a home is quite a bit less. So I just quickly did some research to verify that, and that is true. The median home price in Faribault is $153,500 compared to Northfield is $226,000, and that's in the most recent census. So there's families who want to attend Northfield Public Schools, but maybe can't afford housing in that community, so they are actually moving to other neighboring districts, Faribault being one of them, where housing is more affordable, and then they're just open enrolling back to Northfield. So that, I don't have numbers on how many are doing that, but that was reiterated in 2 of the surveys from parents, and then also in our conversations with Northfield Public School District leadership. And then lack of affordable housing units in Faribault. So families wishing to stay in Faribault, but they're not able to find affordable housing, and they're moving elsewhere. So it's kind of 2 different things under housing affordability and growth there. A higher proportion of single households in Faribault. We've got many more seniors who are aging in place, a higher number of seniors in Rice County, but particularly Faribault, and single parent households. So I think there's some more research that could be done there around the single parent households, but that was some information that came out in the study. And then geography, our closeness to communities with higher economies, so Northfield and Owatonna, and them having really strong school districts, and then us just being 15 minutes away from them, that impacts our enrollment. And people making comments like, it's I live on the south end of Faribault, it's just as easy for me to drive to Medford or Owatonna as it is to drive to some school within Faribault. And so just our closeness to other communities. And then our proximity to lakes. So that's something that came up in that we, many of our more affluent families live out on the lakes, and that living outside of the town, they are out enrolling to neighboring districts because they're closer to bus routes and such. So just that was brought up, that we have a lot of higher income earners that live out on the lakes, or they're just not living in the community. They might be in the district, but they're not in the community per se. So again, those are the housing and geography thing was really interesting to me, and something that I think would be beneficial to spend more time investigating. The 5th bucket here is youth sports and athletics programs. So again, youth sports and athletics came up as a kind of a broader community issue that folks mentioned in those specific questions. So again, politics and youth sports, and there being gatekeepers, and the whole kids being forced, if you will, to be too competitive too early, and not spending the time to build I guess, skills or camaraderie or just have fun. The second issue here is specific to middle and high school sports. So a lack of connection between youth associations and the high school or middle school sports. So I think, for example, there was someone who said, well, my son likes tennis, but there's no, and we played tennis, but then there's no team, at the high school. I think that was the example used. So he liked that sport, so we moved over to another school district that had the sport in high school. And so there was a few comments like that. Middle schoolers, 7th and 8th graders playing up on varsity. So because of their having fewer numbers in sports and JV or varsity sports pulling students up out of the middle school programs, parents, some are okay with it, but many were saying that they just generally didn't like that because students aren't getting the development that they need, and then it hurts those younger teams because they're taking essentially their best players out, moving them up, and so it's kind of hurting the whole program. The last one here is just fewer students in sports and having less competitive programs. Losing teams can affect the overall school and community pride, and then family engagement. So family engagement was talking to, families that have kids in sports are more involved in the community. They're more involved in school. So if there's fewer students in sports, that's less opportunities for those families to be engaged in the school and the broader community. So taking these two kind of big buckets, the individual and family level reasons, and then the more systemic and community-wide issues, and combining them, we have five key areas, and they are education, quality, image, and issue management included in that, diversity, equity, and inclusion, so our increasingly diverse community, and we saw all the different issues within that. Overall community pride, youth athletics and sports teams, and then housing and geography. Okay, so a few recommendations. And these come from me personally, having been the person to lead this work for the last 4 months, talk to all these people, go through all the survey responses, and really live and breathe this for quite some time. These are my recommendations, take them or leave them. But I encourage all school systems within Faribault to review the report in detail and have candid conversations about declining enrollment with your staff and with the families you serve. We will never be able to move the needle on any of the issues at the center of declining enrollment if they are not brought out into the open and discussed as a community. Schools can and should review the key findings and discuss how each one of them individually may or may not pertain to their programs. I imagine that not every school relates to every item in this report. This is not pointing a finger at all the schools saying, all of these issues are happening in every school building. That is not the case. Each and every family who chooses to out enroll from Faribault, I believe they should be offered an exit interview. Claiming to not know why families are leaving or that they refuse to share why they're leaving shouldn't be acceptable. This issue has gone on a long time, And I think this study just kind of proves that if you give parents the opportunity to share their experience, they will, and they'll give you a lot of information. So we have to have a process to allow that dialogue to happen. Families take on average 6 months to decide whether or not they're going to leave. So maybe consider developing an issue management plan or a team within every building that resolves issues quickly. And let's see if we can disrupt that 6-month window. I further recommend to avoid conflicts of interest and ensure progress continues to be made on this, that that the enrollment task force and the city and the school district and the school board get together and consider investing in an outside consulting firm to lead the work in some of these more challenging systemic issues. I'd say if it's done right, it might be expensive, but you get what you pay for. The cost would be minimal compared to the millions of dollars leaving the community every year because of out enrollment. If the work is not measured, it's not going to get done. So I'd suggest developing some key metrics around the various issues and determine who should lead it, who should support it, who's just going to be a partner. Does Faribault Public Schools own the housing issue? No. Does the chamber own youth sports issue? No. But these organizations could be partners in the work, and have some shared goals across organizations. Create a dashboard, if you will, tracking progress on these issues, and share that dashboard with the community. I think if people know that there's work happening to make things better, they might be less likely to leave, and they might be more willing to be part of the solution. Lastly, everyone can play a role in being part of the solution, not only where we choose to send our kids to school, but where we shop for groceries, where we eat out, where we seek entertainment, get healthcare, car repairs, and so on. It all plays a part. Every time we spend our money, we make a choice, and these investments add up over time. So please choose Faribault first. And in conclusion, progress is positive. All of the surveys this is just merely a snapshot in time. This survey does not represent the beliefs and experiences of every family or student who has out enrolled from Faribault. The experiences of families who left 5 to 7 years ago may be very different than those who choose to leave today. As the person who's been closest to the work of this, I would advocate that anyone hearing this report do so with positivity and an eye towards progress. Yes, the content may inherently have an undertone of negativity, but that's due to the nature of the topic. I'm reminded of the fact that this work was initiated by the community requesting it last summer. And when the school board was considering the dissolution of the collaborative sports agreement, and there was a demand that we look into the root causes for declining enrollment. This study is the product of the community speaking up and taking action, and acknowledging our challenges helps restore and build trust with the community. And that should be viewed upon very positively. Everyone who participated in the study and interviews came to this issue with courage and the hope of helping to make a positive change for Faribault. Comments and conversations were respectful and candid. Listening to our community and our neighbors with openness and humility, and sharing what they had to say without bias is a huge step in the right direction. So thank you for creating the space for these positive conversations to occur. Thank you.